The file in front of you was never officially closed. The investigators moved on. The witnesses stopped talking. The leads ran dry, but the case never closed. What you are about to hear has been documented. The timeline, the evidence, the questions that were never answered. Welcome to case number unknown. Let's open the file. On the night of December 30th, 2000, while most of Tokyo prepared to celebrate the arrival of a new millennium, someone entered a quiet home in the Setagaya district and systematically murdered an entire family of 4. The killer then stayed in the house for hours, eating their food, using their computer, and sleeping in their beds. Despite leaving behind a mountain of physical evidence, fingerprints, DNA, clothing fibers, even a partial shoe print, no one has ever been arrested. This is the Setagaya family murder, and it remains the most baffling unsolved case in Japanese criminal history. The Miyazawa family lived in a modest 2-story home in the Kamikitazawa neighborhood of Setagaya, one of Tokyo's western residential wards. Mikio Miyazawa was 44 years old, a graduate of a prestigious university and a working professional with a gentle reputation among neighbors. His wife Yasuko was 41, a devoted mother who had given up her own career ambitions to raise their 2 children. Their daughter Nina was 8 years old, bright and curious, a second grader who loved to draw. Their son Ray was just 6, a first grader who idolized his father. By all accounts, the Miyazawas were an ordinary, loving family. Their home sat adjacent to a small public park, separated only by a low fence that anyone could scale. It was a detail that would prove tragically significant. The last day of the Miyazawa family's life was December 30th, 2000. That Saturday had been unremarkable. Mikio had spent part of the day working on his computer. Yasuko had tended to household duties and looked after the children. As evening fell, the family settled into their routine. The children were put to bed on the 2nd floor. Mikio and Yasuko retired for the night. Outside, the temperature dropped as Tokyo moved toward midnight. The streets grew quiet, and somewhere in the darkness, someone was making their way toward the Miyazawa home. Investigators would later reconstruct the horrific sequence of events using forensic evidence found throughout the house. The killer is believed to have entered through an unlocked bathroom window on the 2nd floor, likely climbing up from the park side of the property. The first victim was 8-year-old Nina. She was strangled in her bed on the 2nd floor. The sounds of the attack appear to have alerted Mikio, who confronted the intruder. A violent struggle ensued. Mikio fought desperately, inflicting defensive wounds on himself as he tried to protect his family. The killer used a sashimi knife, a long, slender blade used for preparing raw fish, and stabbed Mikio multiple times. Mikio collapsed and died from his wounds on the 2nd floor landing. The killer then descended to the 1st floor, where Yasuko and 6-year-old Ray were found. It is believed Yasuko heard the commotion and attempted to flee or hide with her son. She did not make it. Both Yasuko and Ray were stabbed to death. The sashimi knife broke during the attack, and the killer retrieved another knife from the kitchen to continue. When it was over, all 4 members of the Miyazawa family were dead. The entire massacre likely took less than 20 minutes. But what happened next is what transforms this tragedy from a horrific crime into an enduring mystery. The killer did not flee. Instead, he stayed in the house for several hours. Investigators estimate between 6 and 10 hours after the murders. He went to the kitchen, opened the refrigerator, and ate ice cream, specifically melon-flavored ice cream from a container he found inside. He drank barley tea. He used the family's computer, accessing the internet and browsing several websites. He went through drawers and personal belongings. He used the bathroom, and at some point, he appears to have fallen asleep on the couch. This was not the behavior of a panicked killer. It was the behavior of someone deeply disturbed, someone detached from the horror of what he had just done. When Yasuko's mother arrived at the home on the afternoon of December 31st to check on the family for New Year's celebrations, she found the front door locked from the inside. Unable to get a response, she called authorities. When police entered the residence, they discovered a scene of carnage and a gold mine of forensic evidence. The killer had left fingerprints on surfaces throughout the house. He had bled from a wound sustained during his struggle with Mikio, leaving blood samples that yielded a full DNA profile. His blood was found mixed with the victim's blood in multiple locations. He had left behind a hip bag, also known as a fanny pack, which contained items that would become central to the investigation. Inside the bag was a pair of gloves, a towel, and other personal effects. His clothing fibers were recovered from furniture where he had sat and slept. A partial shoe print was identified as coming from a pair of Schlesinger brand sneakers, a relatively uncommon brand in Japan at the time, with a sole pattern that was traced to a limited production run sold primarily in South Korea. The DNA analysis revealed something remarkable. The killer's genetic profile showed a mixed heritage, markers consistent with both East Asian and Southern European ancestry. Some analysts suggested the suspect might be of mixed Japanese and European descent, or possibly Korean with European lineage. The sand particles found in the hip bag were analyzed and determined to be consistent with volcanic sand from a specific region, possibly linking the suspect to areas near active volcanic zones in East Asia or the Pacific. Tokyo Metropolitan Police launched one of the largest criminal investigations in Japanese history. At its peak, more than 200 detectives were assigned to the case. They interviewed thousands of individuals. They ran the DNA and fingerprints through every available database in Japan, through Interpol, and through law enforcement agencies across Asia, Europe, and North America. They distributed millions of flyers bearing details about the suspect's shoe brand, blood type, type A, and the distinctive hip bag. Rewards were offered, eventually reaching 20 million yen, approximately $200,000. Despite all of this, not a single viable suspect was ever identified. Over the years, investigators pursued numerous theories. One line of inquiry focused on the Schlesinger sneakers and the Korean sand particles, leading detectives to investigate possible suspects in South Korea. Korean police cooperated extensively, but no match was found. Another theory suggested the killer might have been a foreigner living temporarily in Japan, possibly a military base resident or an English teacher, transient populations that might explain why no local connections could be established. Some investigators theorized the murders were personal, that the killer knew the family and had a specific motive, while others believed it was a random act committed by a severely mentally disturbed individual who chose the house because of its easy access from the adjacent park. The case haunted Japanese society in ways that went beyond the ordinary. In a country with one of the lowest violent crime rates in the developed world, the idea that an entire family could be slaughtered in their own home, in a safe residential neighborhood of Tokyo, was almost incomprehensible. The Miyazawa home was preserved as a crime scene for years, left standing while the surrounding neighborhood changed around it. Neighbors moved away. Children no longer played in the adjacent park. The house became a monument to unresolved horror, a physical reminder that justice had not been served. In 2006, Japanese authorities announced that advances in DNA technology had allowed them to refine the suspect's genetic profile further. The new analysis suggested the suspect's maternal lineage traced to Southern Europe, specifically the Mediterranean region, while his paternal lineage was East Asian. This narrowed the suspect pool significantly, but still failed to produce a match. In subsequent years, investigative genetic genealogy techniques that had solved cold cases in other countries were explored, but Japan's strict privacy laws and limited public DNA databases made this approach far more difficult than it had been in places like the United States. The statute of limitations for murder in Japan was originally 15 years, which would have meant the case could no longer be prosecuted after 2015. However, in 2010, Japan abolished the statute of limitations for murder cases, meaning the Setagaya investigation can continue indefinitely. Tokyo Metropolitan Police have stated publicly and repeatedly that the case remains active. Detectives continue to follow leads. The reward still stands. Every year, on the anniversary of the murders, police renew their appeal to the public for information. As of today, more than 2 decades have passed since Mikio, Yasuko, Nina, and Rei Miyazawa were killed in their home on that winter night. Their killer left behind his blood, his DNA, his fingerprints, his clothing, and his shoe prints. He ate their food, used their computer, and slept under the same roof as his victims. He left behind more physical evidence than investigators encounter in most cases that are solved within days. And yet, he has never been found. The question that has tormented detectives, forensic scientists, and the Japanese public for over 20 years is as haunting as it is simple. How does a killer leave behind everything except his identity? The investigation is ongoing. If you have a case you think deserves a file, leave it in the comments. New files open every week. Subscribe, because the truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how long it takes.